April 14, 1943, Pearl Harbor. Lieutenant Commander Edwin Layton, 41, from Nauvoo, Illinois, held a decrypted message that could change the war. His hands trembled slightly as he read the Japanese text, now rendered in English. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, architect of Pearl Harbor, Japan's most brilliant naval mind, would fly to Bougainville in 4 days. The message specified everything: departure time, arrival time, escort aircraft, even the type of bomber carrying him. Could American forces reach him in time? What Layton didn't know: this single sheet of paper would trigger the most audacious assassination mission of World War II. The decision made in the next 72 hours would eliminate Japan's strategic mastermind and demonstrate that no enemy leader, no matter how protected, remained beyond American reach. The intelligence came from Station HYPO, the cryptanalysis unit housed in the basement of the 14th Naval District Headquarters. For 18 months, these codebreakers had worked 16-hour shifts, breaking Japanese Naval General Purpose Code, designated JN-25. They had cracked versions of this cipher before Midway, providing Admiral Nimitz with Japan's battle plans. But this intercept offered something unprecedented: a chance to kill the man who had orchestrated Pearl Harbor. Layton walked the message directly to Admiral Chester Nimitz. The Pacific Fleet commander read it twice, his face revealing nothing. Then he asked the question that would define the entire operation: do we have aircraft that can reach him? The answer was complicated. Bougainville sat 435 miles from the nearest American airfield at Guadalcanal. Japanese fighters patrolled the area constantly. Yamamoto would travel in a fast bomber with 0 escorts, among the most maneuverable fighters in the Pacific. Any interception required split-second timing, overwhelming firepower, and pilots willing to fly the longest fighter mission yet attempted in the theater. Nimitz made his decision within minutes: get Yamamoto. The order went to Major John Mitchell, commander of the 339th Fighter Squadron. Mitchell commanded 18 P-38 Lightning pilots based at Fighter II airstrip on Guadalcanal. His aircraft possessed one critical advantage: range. With drop tanks, P-38s could fly 1,000 miles. But the mission Nimitz demanded would push them to their absolute limit. Mitchell spread maps across his operations tent. The flight path required flying 435 miles at wave-top level to avoid Japanese radar, arriving at a specific point within a 2-minute window, engaging enemy fighters and bombers, then flying 435 miles back, all on the fuel capacity of their auxiliary tanks. The margin for error was 0. His pilots gathered for the briefing on April 17th. Mitchell explained the target without identifying him initially. Then he revealed the truth: they would kill Admiral Yamamoto. The tent erupted. Every pilot knew that name. Every pilot remembered. Pearl Harbor. Captain Thomas Lanphier, 24, from Detroit, volunteered immediately. So did First Lieutenant Rex Barber, 24, from Culver, Oregon. Mitchell selected 16 pilots total, 4 designated as the killer flight that would attack Yamamoto's bomber, 12 flying top cover against Japanese fighters. They would launch at 07:25 hours on April 18th, arrive over Bougainville at 09:35 hours, exactly when Yamamoto's aircraft descended toward the airfield. That night, ground crews worked under floodlights, installing 310-gallon drop tanks under each P-38's wings. Mechanics checked every engine, every control surface, every gun. A single mechanical failure 400 miles from base meant death. The pilots studied silhouettes of Japanese bombers, memorizing the distinctive shape of the G-4M Betty, the type carrying Yamamoto. But one problem remained unsolved. The mission's success depended entirely on Station HYPO's cryptanalysis being correct. If the Japanese had changed Yamamoto's schedule, if the intercept contained disinformation, if any detail was wrong, 16 American pilots would fly into empty sky, or worse, into a trap. How reliable was the intelligence? The codebreakers at Station HYPO had built their reputation on accuracy. Led by Commander Joseph Rochefort, they had provided the intelligence that won Midway. But that victory nearly exposed their capability. After the battle, the Chicago Tribune published details suggesting American forces had advanced knowledge of Japanese plans. Navy cryptanalysts feared Japan would change their codes entirely. For weeks after Midway, they held their breath, monitoring Japanese transmissions for any sign of a cipher overhaul. The codes remained unchanged. Japanese cryptographers believed JN-25 was unbreakable. This confidence was their fatal weakness. Station HYPO intercepted Yamamoto's itinerary on April 13th. The message originated from the Imperial Japanese Navy headquarters in Rabaul, addressed to commanders at Bougainville and Bougainville. It detailed an inspection tour. Yamamoto would visit frontline units across the Solomon Islands, boosting morale after recent defeats. The schedule was precise. April 18th, depart Rabaul 0600 hours in a Mitsubishi G4M bomber. Arrive Bougainville 0800 hours. Proceed to Bougainville. Escort 60 fighters. Cryptanalyst Jasper Holmes brought the decoded message to Rochefort. Holmes, a naval reserve officer and former submarine commander, specialized in Japanese military vocabulary. He recognized immediately what they had, not just an admiral's travel plans, but a chance to strike directly at Japanese leadership. Rochefort understood the implications. Yamamoto wasn't just any admiral. He had conceived the Pearl Harbor attack. He had commanded at Midway. He embodied Japanese naval strategy. His death would devastate Japanese morale and eliminate the mind behind their Pacific operations. But using this intelligence carried enormous risk. If American fighters appeared at exactly the right place and time to intercept Yamamoto, Japanese cryptographers might realize their codes were compromised. Japan could change their entire communication system overnight, blinding American intelligence. Rochefort sent the message up the chain of command with his recommendation. The opportunity was worth the risk. Kill Yamamoto. Secretary of the Navy, Frank Knox, received the intelligence in Washington. He brought it to President Roosevelt. The president authorized the mission without hesitation. Roosevelt harbored particular hatred for Yamamoto, viewing him as personally responsible for Pearl Harbor. The order returned to Nimitz within 24 hours. Proceed with the assassination. Mitchell's pilots slept poorly on April 17th. They knew the odds. Japanese fighters based at Kahili could scramble dozens of zeros within minutes. If the timing was wrong, if they arrived early or late, they would face overwhelming enemy numbers with their fuel already half depleted. The 4 pilots assigned to attack Yamamoto's bomber, Lanphier, Barber, Besby Holmes, and Raymond Hine, faced the greatest danger. They would dive toward their target while Zeros swarmed to defend it. Dawn broke clear over Guadalcanal on April 18th. Mitchell walked through the pre-dawn darkness, checking each aircraft personally. At 0710 hours, he gave the order. 18 P-38 Lightnings fired their engines, the twin Allison motors creating a thunder that shook Fighter II airstrip. They rolled for takeoff at 0725 hours, exactly on schedule. 1 P-38 blew a tire on takeoff and aborted. Another developed drop tank problems and turned back. 16 aircraft continued, dropping to 50 feet above the water. Mitchell navigated by compass and dead reckoning. Radio silence was absolute. If they transmitted anything, Japanese direction finders would track them. The P-38s skimmed the ocean, invisible to radar, alone above an empty sea. Would they find their target, or would this mission end as an exhausting flight to nowhere? The codebreakers who made Yamamoto's assassination possible had spent 2 years developing their capability. Station HYPO began operations in June 1941, 6 months before Pearl Harbor. The unit occupied the basement of the Pearl Harbor Administration Building, a windowless space filled with filing cabinets, card catalogs, and cipher machines. 23 officers and enlisted men worked in shifts, intercepting Japanese radio transmissions and attempting to decode them. Commander Joseph Rochefort directed Station HYPO. 42 years old, from Dayton, Ohio, he had studied Japanese language in Tokyo during the 1920s. Rochefort understood that breaking naval codes required more than linguistic skill. It demanded pattern recognition, mathematical analysis, and intuition about how humans created secret messages. He recruited specialists, mathematicians who could identify statistical patterns, linguists who understood Japanese military terminology, radio operators who recognized individual Morse code sending styles. JN-25, the Japanese Naval General Purpose Code, presented extraordinary complexity. Japanese cryptographers had designed it as a two-step cipher. First, they encoded messages using a code book containing 45,000 five-digit groups, each representing a word, phrase, or number. Then they applied an additive, another five-digit number taken from a separate book, to each code group. The result was mathematically scrambled. To decrypt a message, cryptanalysts needed both the code book and the additive book. Japanese doctrine required changing additives every few months, forcing codebreakers to restart their analysis repeatedly. Station HYPO attacked JN-25 through volume. They intercepted thousands of messages monthly. Each intercept provided data points. Repeated groups suggested common words. The ship attack. Messages sent to multiple recipients using different additives allowed comparison. Gradually, patterns emerged. By December 1941, Station HYPO could read fragments of JN-25, perhaps 15 to 20% of an average message. Pearl Harbor proved their work had barely begun. The attack achieved complete surprise despite weeks of Japanese naval radio traffic. Rochefort's team had intercepted multiple messages using terms they couldn't decode. Later analysis showed these messages discussed the Codebreaker, the carrier strike force, and its movement toward Hawaii. The code groups remained opaque. Thousands of sailors died while the information that could have saved them sat encrypted in Station HYPO's files. This failure drove Rochefort to obsession. After December 7th, he rarely left the basement. He worked 18-hour shifts, sleeping on a cot beside his desk. His team expanded to more than 100 personnel, operating 24 hours daily. They developed new techniques. IBM punch card machines helped sort code groups. Traffic analysis tracked which Japanese units communicated with which headquarters, revealing organizational structure even when messages remained encrypted. Direction-finding stations across the Pacific triangulated transmitter locations, showing where enemy ships operated. The breakthrough came through persistence and mathematics. Cryptanalyst Thomas Dyer, a former math teacher from Indiana, noticed that certain five-digit groups appeared with unusual frequency. These weren't random. Japanese radio operators used standard phrases: "I have the honor to inform," "respectfully reported," "urgent." Once Station HYPO identified a few code groups representing common phrases, they could begin reconstructing the code book. Each recovered group provided context for surrounding groups. The process accelerated. By March 1942, Station HYPO could read approximately 40% of intercepted messages. Enough to understand general intentions, not enough to provide tactical specifics. Then Japanese forces began preparing for their next major operation. Traffic volumes surged. Messages referred to AF, a location code Station HYPO suspected meant Midway Island. Rochefort needed confirmation. He devised a brilliant ruse. He had Midway's garrison transmit an uncoded message reporting that their water distillation plant had broken down. 2 days later, Station HYPO intercepted a Japanese message reporting that AF was short of fresh water. Midway was the target. This intelligence allowed Nimitz to concentrate 3 American carriers near Midway before the Japanese arrived. The resulting battle destroyed 4 Japanese carriers and killed experienced pilots Japan couldn't replace. Midway shifted the Pacific War's momentum. It also validated Station HYPO's cryptanalysis. Rochefort received the Distinguished Service Medal, though the award was delayed for months because acknowledging code-breaking openly could compromise security. After Midway, Japanese signal security remained dangerously lax. Naval officers believed JN-25 was mathematically unbreakable. They couldn't imagine that enemy cryptanalysts possessed both the intellectual capability and the persistence to attack a two-step cipher with 45,000 code groups. This arrogance proved fatal. Through late 1942 and early 1943, Station HYPO's effectiveness increased. By April 1943, they could read 70 to 80% of intercepted messages. Important traffic, like an admiral's travel itinerary, typically contained enough context that even partially encrypted sections could be inferred. The April 13th intercept regarding Yamamoto used relatively simple language. Japanese radio operators had transmitted it in JN-25D, the current version of the cipher. Station HYPO had been reading JN-25D for 6 weeks. The message format followed standard Japanese military communication style: originator, recipients, date, subject, then detailed information. Cryptanalyst Jasper Holmes decoded it within hours of interception. Holmes understood why the Japanese felt comfortable transmitting Yamamoto's schedule. Radio communication was essential for coordinating operations across thousands of miles of Pacific Ocean. Japanese forces couldn't function without it. Their cryptographers had assured Naval Command that JN-25 was secure. Signals discipline was excellent. Radio operators followed procedures precisely, changed additives on schedule, never reused one-time pads. The mathematics protecting their codes seemed impenetrable. They had failed to account for American industrial capacity. Station HYPO could intercept every Japanese transmission across the Pacific simultaneously. Multiple direction-finding stations recorded each signal. IBM machines processed thousands of code groups daily, searching for patterns. Dozens of cryptanalysts worked parallel analysis, sharing discoveries instantly. Japan's human cryptographers, working manually with codebooks and paper, couldn't match this systematic assault. The mechanism that broke Yamamoto's travel plans was fundamentally simple: traffic volume plus statistical analysis plus human intuition. Japanese radio operators transmitted hundreds of messages daily. Most used repetitive language, status reports, supply requests, movement orders. These common phrases appeared in similar positions within message structures. Station HYPO cataloged every decoded group, building a database of associations. When a new message arrived, cryptanalysts could match its code groups against known patterns. Computer-assisted analysis identified probable meanings. Human experts verified the results, applying knowledge of Japanese military vocabulary and context. Before code-breaking, finding an enemy admiral in the Pacific was impossible. The ocean covered 64 million square miles. Japanese forces operated from dozens of bases. A single admiral could be anywhere. Reconnaissance aircraft might spot major fleet movements, but individual aircraft were invisible. Yamamoto could have traveled from Rabaul to Bougainville without any American commander knowing he'd left his headquarters. After Station HYPO decoded his itinerary, uncertainty vanished. American planners knew Yamamoto's exact route, altitude, speed, escort strength, departure time, and arrival time. They could position fighters along his flight path, calculate interception geometry, and plan every detail of the attack. Cryptanalysis had transformed a nearly impossible targeting problem into a straightforward fighter interception. Some intelligence officers opposed the mission. Captain Edwin Layton, who briefed Nimitz daily on Japanese capabilities, understood the strategic risk. If the Japanese realized their codes were compromised, they would change everything. American forces would go blind across the entire Pacific theater. Submarines wouldn't know where enemy convoys sailed. Carriers wouldn't anticipate Japanese fleet movements. The intelligence advantage that helped win Midway would disappear. Others argued the opportunity was too valuable. Yamamoto wasn't just an admiral. He had designed Japan's pre-war naval expansion. He had personally selected pilots for the carrier strike force. He understood American industrial capacity better than any Japanese officer, having studied at Harvard and served as naval attaché in Washington during the 1920s. He had opposed war with America initially, predicting Japan would win victories for 6 months, then face inevitable defeat. When ordered to plan the opening attack, he had conceived Pearl Harbor. His death would eliminate Japan's most capable strategic thinker. Nimitz sided with killing Yamamoto. He calculated that Japan would attribute the interception to chance or coast watchers rather than signals intelligence. The timing would seem like bad luck. American fighters happened to be in the area when Yamamoto's bomber flew past. Japanese cryptographers wouldn't suspect the truth. The risk was acceptable. This decision reflected American confidence in cryptanalysis. By April 1943, Station HYPO had proven its capability repeatedly. The intelligence product was too valuable to sacrifice merely to avoid risk. The entire Pacific campaign depended on knowing Japanese intentions before they materialized. Nimitz would preserve that capability while using it aggressively. Could the Americans execute the mission without revealing how they found their target? Major John Mitchell spent April 17th planning navigation for the longest overwater fighter mission yet attempted in the Pacific. The P-38 Lightning could theoretically reach Bougainville with drop tanks, but theory and combat reality differed substantially. Wind conditions, fuel consumption rates, and navigation accuracy would determine whether his pilots returned alive. Mitchell had flown fighters since 1940. 33 years old, from Enid, Oklahoma, he understood that successful missions required obsessive attention to detail. The Yamamoto interception demanded perfection. A single navigation error could position his fighters miles from the target. Arriving even 5 minutes late meant Yamamoto's bomber would land at Rabaul airfield under the protection of ground-based anti-aircraft guns. Arriving early meant orbiting within range of Japanese radar and fighters from Kahili. The window for success measured perhaps 60 seconds. He calculated the navigation track using dead reckoning. Fighter 2 airstrip to Empress Augusta Bay covered 265 miles on a heading of 290 degrees. From there, turning northwest toward Bougainville's southern coast added 170 miles. Total distance, 435 miles each way. His P-38s would fly at 200 miles per hour to conserve fuel, requiring 2 hours and 10 minutes flying time. Launch at 07:25 hours meant arrival at 09:35 hours, the exact time Yamamoto's bomber was scheduled to approach Rabaul. But dead reckoning navigation accumulated errors. Wind pushed aircraft off course. Compass deviation increased over distance. Mitchell had no landmarks to verify position over open ocean. He would fly 435 miles over water, hoping his calculations placed him at the right point in the sky within a 2-minute window. What if the wind was stronger than predicted? Would they miss Yamamoto entirely? Mitchell briefed his pilots on these challenges. Each P-38 would carry 2 310-gallon drop tanks plus internal fuel, 1,590 gallons total. At cruise power, their engines consumed approximately 100 gallons hourly. The mission required 4.5 hours flying time minimum, plus reserves for combat. They would operate at the absolute limit of their aircraft's capability. Any combat maneuvering, any detours to avoid Japanese fighters, any navigation errors requiring course corrections, all burned extra fuel. Running dry meant ditching in the ocean hundreds of miles from rescue. Captain Thomas Lanphier volunteered to lead the killer flight despite understanding these odds. 24 years old, son of a brigadier general, he had joined the Army Air Forces seeking combat after Pearl Harbor. Lanphier possessed supreme confidence in his abilities, sometimes bordering on arrogance. Other pilots found him abrasive, but he could fly. His gunnery scores ranked among the squadron's best. Mitchell selected him for the attack element alongside First Lieutenant Rex Barber, Lieutenant Besby Holmes, and Lieutenant Raymond Hine. These 4 pilots would dive on Yamamoto's bomber the moment they spotted it. The remaining 12 P-38s, led by Mitchell, would fly top cover 4,000 feet above, engaging Japanese escort fighters. The plan's simplicity concealed its difficulty. The killer flight had to identify the correct bomber. Intelligence indicated Yamamoto would fly in one of 2 G4M aircraft, then close to firing range, while Zero escorts tried to stop them. Japanese pilots were skilled and aggressive. Their Zeros could outmaneuver P-38s in tight turns. Lanfear's flight would get 1 firing pass before the Zeros swarmed them. Barber studied aircraft recognition charts throughout April 17th. The G4M bomber, called Betty by Americans, had a distinctive silhouette, cigar-shaped fuselage, mid-mounted wings, twin engines in nacelles extending forward of the wing-leading edge. But identifying specific aircraft in combat was difficult. Everything happened at high speed with poor visibility. Barber needed to recognize the Betty instantly, make 1 perfect gunnery pass, then escape before Zeros killed him. Could he execute under those conditions? The pilots tested their drop tanks on April 17th. Ground crews had installed the 310-gallon auxiliary tanks using improvised fittings. Fighter II's equipment wasn't designed for these large tanks. During the test flight, Lieutenant Raymond Hine's drop tanks wouldn't feed fuel properly. His aircraft's engines quit when he selected auxiliary tanks, restarting only when he switched back to internal fuel. The mechanics worked through the afternoon repairing his system, finally solving the problem near sunset. 1 faulty tank would have reduced the killer flight to 3 aircraft. Weather presented another variable. Tropical thunderstorms built over the Solomons every afternoon. Heavy clouds could obscure Yamamoto's bomber completely. The mission required visual contact. P-38s carried no radar. Mitchell studied weather reports, noting that April 18th was forecast clear with scattered clouds. Good conditions, but not guaranteed. If weather deteriorated, the entire mission failed. Japanese fighter patrols worried Mitchell more than weather. Kahili Airfield, just 30 miles from the planned interception point, based approximately 75 Zeros. If Japanese radar detected the incoming P-38s, or if patrol flights spotted them, dozens of enemy fighters could scramble. Mitchell's 18 aircraft, 16 after the 2 aborts, couldn't survive against that many opponents. Surprise was essential. The P-38s had to remain invisible until they reached Bougainville, hit Yamamoto's bomber, then escape before Japanese reinforcements arrived. Station HYPO's intelligence provided one critical advantage. Yamamoto's bomber would fly at 4,500 feet, relatively low altitude. This meant the P-38s could approach from above, diving to attack with speed advantage. Mitchell planned to bring his formation to 18,000 feet as they neared Bougainville, positioning his cover flight where they could see any Japanese fighters. The killer flight would drop to lower altitude, hunting for the bombers. The psychological weight of assassinating a specific person troubled some pilots. Fighter pilots typically shot at aircraft, not individuals. Knowing their target was Admiral Yamamoto personally, that they were hunting a man, not just destroying an enemy bomber, felt different. Some pilots compared it to murder. Others argued that Yamamoto had killed thousands at Pearl Harbor. Killing him was justice. Mitchell didn't encourage this debate. His orders were clear: intercept and destroy Yamamoto's aircraft. Whether that constituted assassination or legitimate military action was irrelevant. The mission served a strategic purpose. Japan would lose its best naval commander. American forces would gain a morale victory. The moral calculations didn't concern Mitchell. Execution did. His final briefing emphasized fuel discipline. Every pilot would monitor their fuel consumption constantly. If anyone fell below minimum reserves before reaching the target, they would abort and return to Guadalcanal. No heroic gestures, no attempts to continue the mission on insufficient fuel. Mitchell needed every pilot back alive if possible. Dying in the ocean after killing Yamamoto wouldn't help America win the war. The pilots slept fitfully on April 17th. Some wrote letters home, sealing them in case they didn't return. Others checked personal equipment, pistols, knives, survival radios. Ditching in the ocean offered poor survival odds, but carrying the right equipment could make the difference. Several pilots inflated their life vests to verify they worked properly. At 0400 hours on April 18th, cooks served breakfast, powdered eggs, canned bacon, coffee. The pilots ate mechanically, their minds focused on the mission ahead. They dressed in flight suits, gathered parachutes and gear, walked through the dark toward the flight line where ground crews had prepared their aircraft. Mitchell conducted a final walk-around inspection. His crew chief reported all aircraft fully fueled, guns loaded, engines checked. The P-38s sat in 2 rows, their twin tails silhouetted against the pre-dawn sky. Auxiliary drop tanks hung under each wing, giving the fighters an ungainly appearance. These tanks would fall away once emptied, restoring the P-38's clean lines and maneuverability. At 0710 hours, pilots climbed into their cockpits. They ran through startup checklists, fired engines, checked instruments, oil pressure normal, fuel flow normal. Radio set to proper frequencies but maintaining silence. At 0725 hours, Mitchell advanced his throttles and began rolling. 17 aircraft followed him down Fighter II's crushed coral runway, lifting into the dawn sky. How many would return? Mitchell led his formation north at 50 feet above the waves. Flying this low, exhausted pilots quickly, maintaining precise altitude while watching for the tiny variations in water texture that indicated submerged coral heads or floating debris, required constant concentration. But radar couldn't detect aircraft at this altitude. The ocean's surface clutter masked them completely. Japanese radar stations on Bougainville and New Georgia would see nothing. The P-38s flew in loose formation, pilots spacing themselves 200 feet apart. Their twin engines created a steady drone, monotonous across 2 hours. Some pilots fought drowsiness despite the mission's tension. Flying long overwater navigation missions produced a hypnotic effect. Endless blue ocean below, empty blue sky above, nothing but engine noise and vibration. Mitchell navigated by compass and clock. He flew 290 degrees for 1 hour and 25 minutes, covering 265 miles to Empress Augusta Bay. No landmarks confirmed his position. He couldn't verify whether wind had pushed the formation east or west of his intended track. Dead reckoning navigation required faith in calculations made before takeoff. At 8:50 hours, Mitchell turned northwest toward Bougainville's southern coast. Another 45 minutes would bring them to the interception point. Besby Holmes experienced drop tank problems at 8:09, 1:15 His auxiliary tanks wouldn't transfer fuel properly. He tried switching between tanks, operating manual fuel pumps, adjusting mixture settings. Nothing worked. His main tanks were draining while the auxiliary fuel remained trapped. Holmes radioed Mitchell, the only transmission during the entire flight, reporting his problem. Mitchell ordered him to abort. Holmes turned back toward Guadalcanal, with Lieutenant Raymond Hine escorting him. The killer flight dropped to 3 aircraft, Lanphier, Barber, and one other pilot whose identity was later disputed. 14 P-38s continued northwest. At 0925 hours, 10 minutes before the scheduled interception, they spotted Bougainville's coast. Mitchell's navigation had been nearly perfect. They were within 2 miles of his calculated position after flying 435 miles over open ocean. This precision was extraordinary, achieved without radar, radio navigation aids, or visual checkpoints. Mitchell climbed his cover flight to 18,000 feet. Lanfear and Barber descended to 10,000 feet, scanning for Japanese aircraft. The visibility was excellent, with scattered clouds at 5,000 feet. Yamamoto's bomber should appear at any moment, flying northwest along the coast toward Balale Airfield. At 09:34, hours 1 minute before the scheduled time, Barber spotted them. 2 olive-green G4M bombers flying in formation at 4,500 feet, heading directly toward the interception point. 6 Zero fighters escorted them, 3 flying above each bomber. Barber radioed, "Bogies, 10 o'clock." Lanfear and Barber accelerated, diving toward the bombers. Their P-38s reached 350 miles per hour in seconds. The Zeros spotted them immediately and turned to intercept. Japanese pilots had been alert, perhaps suspiciously so. They reacted within seconds of the P-38's appearance, breaking formation and diving to defend the bombers. Lanfear turned toward the Zeros, engaging them to clear Barber's attack run. 3 Zeros pursued Lanfear, firing as they closed. Lanfear's P-38 could outrun Zeros in level flight, but couldn't outmaneuver them in turns. He needed to extend away using his superior speed, but that meant abandoning the attack. Instead, he turned hard left, trying to position for a shot at the bombers. The Zeros closed, their 20mm cannon rounds passing just above his canopy. Barber ignored the fighters and focused on the lead bomber. He closed to 400 yards, positioned his P-38 directly astern, and fired his 450 caliber machine guns and single 20mm cannon. The convergence was perfect. His rounds hit the bomber's right engine, which exploded immediately. Pieces of engine cowling and wing fragments flew past Barber's canopy. The bomber rolled right, trailing fire and smoke. The crippled G4M dove toward the jungle below. Barber followed, firing continuously. His rounds walked along the fuselage, shattering windows and tearing holes in the thin aluminum skin. The bomber's right wing collapsed at 1,000 feet. The aircraft rolled inverted and hit the jungle canopy at high speed, disintegrating on impact. The crash site erupted in flames as aviation fuel ignited. Barber pulled up hard, his P-38 screaming through maximum G-load. Zeros swarmed around him. He extended to the southeast, using full throttle to outrun them. His airspeed indicator passed 400 miles per hour as he dove toward the ocean. The Zeros pursued, but fell behind. Japanese fighters couldn't match the P-38's speed in level flight. Above the combat, Mitchell's cover flight engaged additional Zeros scrambling from Kahili. The Japanese had launched reinforcements within minutes of the first sighting. Mitchell counted at least 15 enemy fighters climbing toward his formation. His pilots engaged them, trying to prevent them from reaching the killer flight below. Lieutenant Besby Holmes and Raymond Hine, who had turned back earlier due to fuel problems, heard the combat radio transmissions. They were 40 miles south, heading back to Guadalcanal. Holmes checked his fuel gauges. He still had enough to rejoin the fight. The 2 P-38s reversed course, accelerating back toward Bougainville. The second G4M bomber, realizing it was under attack, dove toward Shortland Island. Its pilot pushed the throttles to maximum power, descending to treetop level where American fighters would have difficulty attacking without hitting the jungle. 3 Zeros escorted it closely. The bomber survived, landing at Bougainville 15 minutes later. Lanfear fought 3 Zeros simultaneously. His P-38 took multiple hits. 20mm rounds punched through his wing and fuselage without hitting critical components. He fired back when opportunities appeared, but couldn't maneuver effectively against 3 opponents. Finally, he extended eastward at full power, the Zeros chasing but gradually falling behind. His aircraft had sustained damage, but the engines ran smoothly. Mitchell counted his aircraft. 13 P-38s remained in the area. 1 lost? No, all present. He'd miscounted in the chaos. The bomber was down, mission accomplished. Now they needed to escape before Japanese reinforcements overwhelmed them. Mitchell ordered all aircraft to disengage and head south. The P-38s dove away, accelerating to maximum speed. Japanese fighters pursued for 20 miles before turning back. Their fuel was running low. They had scrambled hastily and couldn't sustain a long chase. The P-38s escaped, though several had taken damage. Mitchell checked his formation. All 14 aircraft were present, though spread across several miles. He ordered them to reform at low altitude for the return flight to Guadalcanal. The return navigation was simpler. Mitchell could follow the coast south, then turn southeast toward Guadalcanal when he reached the appropriate point. His fuel gauges showed adequate reserves, though not generous. They would arrive with minimal fuel remaining. At 11:25 hours, the P-38s landed at Fighter 2. Ground crews counted them in, 14 aircraft, all returning safely. Several showed battle damage, bullet holes in wings and fuselages, shattered canopy plexiglass, damaged control surfaces. But all pilots survived without serious injury. They climbed from their cockpits exhausted, drenched in sweat, after 4 hours and 20 minutes of flying. Mitchell reported to intelligence officers, one Japanese bomber destroyed, confirmed crashed in the jungle. The second bomber escaped. 6 Zeros engaged, number destroyed uncertain. Pilots had claimed 2 probable kills. Mitchell believed they had hit Yamamoto's aircraft based on the location and timing, but couldn't confirm the target's identity. That would require reconnaissance. During the mission's 4.5 hours, American forces had eliminated Japan's most capable naval strategist. Intelligence confirmed within days that Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto had died in the crashed bomber. Japanese search parties recovered his body from the jungle, still strapped into his seat, killed instantly by the impact. Yamamoto's death shocked the Japanese military and public. He had embodied naval excellence, combining strategic vision with tactical skill. His planning had achieved Japan's early war victories. His understanding of American industrial capacity had made him one of the few Japanese leaders who accurately assessed their long-term prospects. Losing him was equivalent to losing an entire carrier division, perhaps more valuable, since Japan could build new carriers but couldn't replace Yamamoto's experience and judgment. The tactical success rippled into strategic consequences. Japanese Naval Command appointed Admiral Minechi Koga as Yamamoto's successor, but Koga lacked his predecessor's offensive instincts and strategic creativity. Japan's naval operations became more cautious and defensive. The psychological initiative shifted further toward American forces. If America could kill Japan's most protected admiral in what should have been safe airspace, what else could they accomplish? Station HYPO's cryptanalysis had enabled the entire operation, yet remained secret. Japanese investigators examined the circumstances of Yamamoto's death extensively. They considered multiple explanations. Coast watchers had spotted the bomber and radioed its position. American fighters had been patrolling randomly and encountered Yamamoto by chance, or traders had leaked the information. Japanese cryptographers examined their codes, but found no evidence of compromise. JN-25 appeared secure. They never suspected the truth. This failure to recognize the code break was perhaps as valuable as Yamamoto's death itself. American cryptanalysts continued reading Japanese naval communications throughout the war. Submarine commanders received intelligence on convoy routes, allowing them to position for attacks. Fleet commanders knew Japanese ship movements weeks before they occurred. The intelligence advantage contributed to every major operation in the Pacific Theater through August 1945. The mission validated long-range fighter operations. Before April 18, 1943, most planners believed fighters couldn't operate effectively more than 200 miles from their bases. Mitchell's navigation demonstrated that careful planning and capable aircraft could extend that range dramatically. This capability became crucial as American forces advanced across the Pacific, with fighters escorting bombers on missions exceeding 1,000 miles. Individual pilot fates varied. Rex Barber, credited with shooting down Yamamoto's bomber, survived the war and remained in the Air Force, retiring as a colonel in 1961. Thomas Lanphier, who also claimed credit for the kill, created controversy that lasted decades. Historians still debate which pilot actually destroyed the bomber. Lanphier left the military after the war and died in 1987. John Mitchell commanded fighter squadrons throughout the Pacific Campaign, finishing the war as a lieutenant colonel with multiple decorations for leadership. Station HYPO's codebreakers received recognition slowly. Commander Joseph Rochefort, who directed the unit through its greatest successes, was transferred to Washington in 1942 after conflicts with senior intelligence officers. He never received proper recognition during the war. Decades later, historians revealed Station HYPO's contributions. Rochefort finally received the Distinguished Service Medal in 1986, 39 years after his death, acknowledging that his code-breaking had shortened the war and saved countless lives. The broader legacy extended into modern military doctrine. The Yamamoto mission demonstrated that signals intelligence could enable targeted strikes against high-value individuals. This capability evolved through subsequent decades, during the Cold War, through Desert Storm, into the War on Terror. Locating and killing specific enemy leaders became a standard military operation. The techniques improved. Satellite reconnaissance replaced direction finding, GPS-guided weapons replaced pilot-aimed guns, drones replaced manned fighters. But the principle remained identical to Station HYPO's work in 1943: decrypt enemy communications, identify targets, execute precision strikes. For Japan, Yamamoto's death symbolized the strategic reality they faced. America possessed industrial capacity, technological sophistication, and military competence that Japan couldn't match. Killing one man wouldn't win the war, but it demonstrated the futility of Japanese resistance. If their best protected admiral could die in supposedly safe airspace, if their most secure codes could be read, if American forces could strike anywhere with precision timing, then Japan's eventual defeat was inevitable. The mission's success validated every decision made along the chain from cryptanalyst to fighter pilot. Station HYPO's patient work-breaking JN-25 created the opportunity. Nimitz's willingness to accept risk authorized the mission. Mitchell's navigation planning ensured the fighters arrived at the correct point. Barber's gunnery destroyed the target. Each element was essential. Remove anyone, and the mission fails. Could modern forces replicate this operation? Certainly with greater ease. Satellites would track the target continuously. Encrypted communications would be broken by supercomputers. Precision-guided missiles would destroy the aircraft from beyond visual range. The challenge in 1943 was achieving these results with 1940s technology: manual cryptanalysis, dead-reckoning navigation, pilot-aimed guns. That they succeeded testified to human capability when properly organized and equipped. 14 P-38 Lightnings had flown 870 miles, intercepted a specific aircraft within a 2-minute window, killed Japan's Supreme Naval Commander, and returned safely. The mission lasted 4 hours and 25 minutes. It changed the Pacific War's trajectory, and it began with codebreakers in a basement at Pearl Harbor, reading messages Japan believed were impossible to decrypt.